everybody. Welcome into the Cubs Weekly Podcast presented by Wintrust, proud legacy partner of the Chicago Cubs and exclusive home of Cubs Checking. Open online today at wintrust.com/Cubs Weekly and check us out. We're available on all podcast platforms, so be sure to rate and subscribe. Tony Andracki here, joined by Andy Martinez. And a little bit later, we'll have Bruce Levine and Lance Brozdowski. And Andy, there's a lot to talk about as I sit here in front of my own bookshelf at home behind me, and it's kind of in reverse as we look at the camera, but it's a joy decoration, Joy, and I feel like there's a lot of joy going on right now in the Cubs fandom, just in general, after signing Dansby Swanson this offseason. So it was a crazy Saturday afternoon. I know you were on your way to dinner. I was in the middle of doing some home renovation stuff, so kind of crazy. That's the way these things seem to go. But what was your initial reaction upon hearing and seeing that Dansby Swanson has a 7-year deal? And, oh, by the way, $177 million is a pretty good wedding gift for a guy who just got married.
Yeah, I mean, that's not a bad way to be able to spend your honeymoon. I'm not sure. I'm sure he didn't need to worry about where they were going to go for their honeymoon, but you can spend a little bit. Maybe you can get an extra dessert plate or something while he's on his honeymoon. But no, my initial reaction, kind of like you, was, oh my gosh, like finally, and also like, oh my gosh, I'm totally unprepared for this, just because it was not expected. Like you say, in the offseason, you kind of have to be prepared for the unexpected. That's kind of what happened with Dansby Swanson. It kind of felt like it was always a perfect fit between the two sides. Dansby Swanson brought Gold Glove level defense to the Chicago Cubs. Chicago Cubs wanted to improve the shortstop position and move Nico Hoerner over to second base. They did that in one fell swoop, and it's a deal that looks like it's going to work out for both sides. I think it's going to give the Cubs a really, really good middle infield that, dare to say, or at least on early reaction, might be arguably the best middle infield defensively in all of baseball.
Yeah, I think actually, I believe it was Jeff Passan tweeted that it gives the Cubs the best defensive middle infield in baseball. Yeah. I mean, he's obviously not a Chicago guy. He's a national reporter. So for him to say that, I mean, and to be honest, I can't disagree. Dansby is coming off the NL Gold Glove Award, and Nico Hoerner was a Gold Glove finalist at second base in the shortened season in 2020. And honestly, I think both of us agree that he should have been a Gold Glove finalist this year at shortstop. Yeah. So, yeah, if both those guys are able to stay healthy, I do think that the Cubs have the best up the middle defense in the middle infield. And then Yan Gomes performed very well, handled the pitching staff very well defensively behind the plate. And then also in center field, Cody Bellinger is a former Gold Glove winner, former MVP as well. But Andy, I know one of the big things that we've talked about on this podcast and just in general, that spine of the defense going up the middle, especially with no shift, and how important it is to have two middle infielders who are athletic, who can go get the ball, make plays, turn double plays, all of that. The Cubs have greatly improved that middle defense this offseason.
They really haven't. It's something that Jed Hoyer said specifically at the winter meetings. He said, one of the truisms that he really believes in is having strong up the middle defense, catcher, second base, shortstop, center field. And they were pretty good at shortstop when Yan Gomes was there. They were good in catcher. Second base and center field were both kind of, mixing and matching of different guys at the position. Now it's solidified it to the level of, not only is it the position just solidified, but it's given you elite defense, which is so important in today's game. The Cubs, when you look at some of the teams that were at the top of any defensive metric you want to look at, whether it's defensive runs saved, outs above average, ultimate zone rating, UZR, a lot of the teams that were at the top were all playoff teams. The Yankees, the Guardians, the Dodgers, the Cardinals. You want to have good defense if you want to have success, and that's what the Cubs did in acquiring Dansby Swanson and in acquiring Cody Bellinger. It immediately improves the defense to where they're at the point that they're in the conversation, at least defensively up the middle, that they can defensively they can compete with some of those other teams like the Dodgers and the Yankees and the Guardians. And the important thing with that defense is, you want to take away outs from the other team, but it also helps your pitching staff. Think about what the biggest struggles for the Chicago Cubs in 2021 with starting pitching early on was they weren't getting length. They were having to go to the bullpen in the 4th, 5th inning. So if you were lucky, maybe you'd get to the 6th inning when you could go to your bullpen. But now, when you have good defense, you take away an out. Maybe that saves your pitcher 10 or 15 pitches. That saves one time through to the lineup that they don't have to see another guy. That just lengthens it for the pitchers. That, hey, if Dansby Swanson steals an out at short, and then Cody Bellinger steals one in center a couple innings later, well, now my pitcher, instead of giving me 4 2/3, he's giving me 5 1/3, 5 2/3, something like that. That now it's elongating the game, it's shortening the bullpen, and it's making those guys more effective. You don't have to use 100 pitches of Marcus Stroman to get through 4 innings. Maybe now you can go 6, 7 innings with 100 pitches. It just improves the whole team drastically, having that up the middle defense that they sought to improve and that they did improve here in this offseason.
Yeah, and honestly, it just, I mean, that defense part, it goes back to with the lack of a shift. It goes back to the way baseball was played when like we were growing up a little bit.
Yeah.
Whereas like before teams, and we saw this, the one example that always sticks out to me is I think it was the Brewers acquired Mike Moustakas, and they played him a bunch at second base. And it was like, this is a guy who had never played second base. He was always playing third. And it was like, well, it doesn't really matter because like he's in the shift a bunch anyways. He's just an infielder. Patrick
Yeah.
Wisdom, when he came up with the Cubs, he was playing good defense at third, but he also played a bunch at like the shortstop type position and made a lot of
Right.
really good plays in 2021 because of that as well. Because the shift, had moved early on. It was Javi Baez over, and then later it was Nico Horner and stuff. So yeah, I think getting back to that, and you have these two guys who are like these really good gloves, who have range, who can turn the double play, who can do all of these things. It's very, very important. And it was obvious that the Cubs really prioritized that, but getting better in general in run prevention, right? Because one of their other big
Yeah.
offseason signings, Jamison Tyone, who has a potential to be a frontline starter, maybe a number 2 for them to open the season in the rotation. A guy, former number 2 overall pick who has had a solid career, but still has some room to grow. Well, like, guess what? His potential looks even better now that they just signed
Yeah.
Dansby Swanson, and the ripple effects of moving Nico Horner over to second and just improving your overall defense. And by the way, having Dansby Swanson could help Morel or Wisdom or McKinstry or whoever's at third base. They can, can help them out there as well. So the Cubs obviously look to improve, strive to improve in that area. I think they definitely are a much better defensive team with the potential to like be a very good defensive team. Ian Happ won the Gold Glove
Yeah.
in left field. Seiya Suzuki is a solid defender in right field. Alfonso Rivas playing first base, and we're not sure how much he's going to play. He has the potential to be a good defender. Like we mentioned, Patrick Wisdom at third base as well. So there's a lot of good things that are coming for this defense. And oh, by the way, Dansby Swanson is a very, very good base runner, and so is Cody
Yeah.
Bellinger. So, like these guys, the Cubs got better in these ancillary type areas that don't necessarily show up on the stat sheet or on the back of a baseball card, but they got a lot better in some of these areas. And I think it's the David Ross effect, right? And it's not just Ross. Like I think Jed Hoyer and Carter Hawkins, like this front office gets it. But David Ross knows that the little things help win games, the base running, the defense, and pitching, all of that is still to go back to what you said about a baseball truism. It is a truism. Like
Yeah.
doing the little things well, preventing runs, being clean on the bases, not giving outs away, not making mistakes, all of those things that helps teams win and can potentially lead to championship baseball. And I think the Dansby Swanson signing is just a perfect example of that and what the Cubs are striving for this winter.
Right. And it's no coincidence that some of the best teams in baseball, I mean, we look at who won the World Series, the Houston Astros. What's up the middle? Jose Altuve, Jeremy Pena, I believe it's McCormick in center field, and Martin Maldonado at catching position. That's pretty good core.
Yeah.
If you look at what the Braves had, where Dansby Swanson came from, Vaughn Grissom, Michael Harris, Travis d'Arnaud, good spine up the middle. Those are things that are really, really important. That, as you mentioned, I think that's the perfect word, insulary. If you would have just signed Cody Bellinger, if you just look at the Cody Bellinger signing, you think, okay, that's a nice signing. Improves your center field defense, whatever. If you look at just the Jamison Tyone signing, you think that's a nice signing. It improves your rotation. It eases some of the pressure off on the younger guys. Same thing with Dansby Swanson. When you look at it as a whole, you see this team got better very quickly. I mean, look at where they were 3 weeks ago, right before the winter meeting started. You're thinking Christopher Morel maybe at second base, Nico Horner at shortstop. You're kind of unsure about center field, and it's Yan Gomes at catcher. That middle, that spine that you talk about. Not only are there question marks, but it's just wasn't solidified like it is now, and the team is drastically improved. That's what you look to do in the offseason, especially at the window where they're at. You have to look at what the Cubs did in the second half, where they were very, very strong. They played very, very good baseball. They had really, really good starting pitching. And if you think that they can do that again, which the Cubs clearly believe that they can pitch well like they did in the second half of last year, then then you have to improve that defense, and you have to improve the team overall in the offseason, which is what they're doing to try to build off that success. Because if you look at the division, it's the Cardinals definitely look really, really strong, and they added Wilson Contreras, and the offense is going to get better. But there's still a lot of question marks. We saw kind of some of the flaws that that team has in September and in the playoffs where they struggled to produce runs. Milwaukee has been so streaky that you don't know what you're going to get out of them night in and night out, especially after that Josh Hader trade. Things seem to start going downhill for them, and then Cincinnati and Pittsburgh are pretty far away from being contending teams. That the Cubs are in the position where if they get the right moves, hit on the right players, and have success early on that they can build on, it makes things really wide open in the division.
So, Andy, how much better do you think the Cubs are now? Because we talked, one of the last podcasts we did was you and I were on with Ryan Dempster, and he was thinking just based off of the Bellinger and Tyone moves on their own, he thought the Cubs were 10 wins better. I think that's reasonable, to be honest. Just like, especially if Bellinger can even recoup 70% of his MVP form offensively, which I think feels very reasonable, right? Like 25 homers, 30 homers, that seems very reasonable. Assuming he can get back to that point, I do think the Cubs are 10 wins better. Then adding Dansby Swanson to this, I mean, it's a guy who had 5.7 WAR last year on Baseball Reference's metric and was just under 5 in Fangraphs. So like he might be worth 5 wins himself, but then plus the ripple effects, like we said, of moving Nico Horner over, of improving things all around. And then Dansby Swanson is by all accounts a very good leader. He has a lot of intangibles. Like you mentioned, he already has won before. So I do think it improves, but I'm curious, like, what do you think? How much better are the Cubs now after this Dansby move, but just in general this offseason? Because, they also added veteran reliever Brad Boxberger just a couple of days ago, too.
I think they're definitely close to that pace that Demp mentioned early on in the podcast of 10 wins. When you think about it, they played I believe it was like a 90-win clip in that second half. If you go back maybe a little bit before the All-Star break, that they were playing at a 90-win pace. Don't think they're a 90-win team quite yet, but they're definitely improving that. They're not a 74, 75-win team, which is what they were last season. They're definitely better than that. They're closer to that 500 mark. They're probably a little bit better than that as it stands. And the thing is, they're not done, right? It's easy to look at that Dansby Swanson signing and think, okay, like let's pull up the Mesa and let's start spring training, and this is the roster that they have. I don't think they're done adding, especially in the bullpen. I think they'll still look maybe for some veteran bats. There's still a lot of very interesting veteran bats out in free agency that could make a lot of sense. I mean, you mentioned Alfonso Rivas at first base, plays great defense, but the bat wasn't totally there last season. That if they wanted to improve the bat at first base in 2023, that could add a couple wins there. Third base, if you try and platoon Patrick Wisdom, that maybe adds a couple wins where he's facing lefties and you have someone who can help against righties. I think that makes the team better overall too. There's just a lot that could happen between now and then. That yes, the team is better, way better than it was at the end of the season when they finished in Cincinnati. But I think there's still more room for growth. I don't think it's easy as saying, yep, this is what they are and they're done and this is what they're going to be. I think they're going to continue adding, and I think it's been no secret that Jed Hoyer has mentioned that there's been plenty of offers that they've made, and there's plenty of moves that are still likely to come.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, adding Dansby Swanson, we talked a lot about the defense and the intangibles and base running and stuff, and we haven't touched much on the offense. And part of that is just because there were four of the big shortstops out there in free agency, and Trey Turner, Carlos Correa, Xander Bogaerts. Of all those, Dansby Swanson's offense doesn't really compare. It's not a 1-to-1 scale on that, right? Like his offense is not quite up to that level. The numbers haven't been so far. That being said, it's not like Swanson is, a negative in that area by any means. The last 2 years, he's averaged 32 doubles, 26 homers, 92 RBI, 88 runs. Like that's a pretty solid guy, who's OPS plus 107, so 7% above league average. He doesn't walk a ton. He does strike out a decent amount, but like this is definitely a guy with power, with speed, who can drive in runs, score runs, probably will hit in the middle of the lineup. So he's absolutely a pretty huge plus to this lineup for sure. And he's a guy that's durable. Like he posts up. He's missed just 2 games over the last 3 seasons. So I think all of that, like being able to have David Ross pencil him in the lineup every single day, will affect the rest of that offense. But like you said, I mean, it's obvious that the Cubs have more to do. It's more that they want to do. Because if you look at this lineup right now, there's more that's needed. And I don't know how they're going to slot it all in. I think a lot of people want to pencil Nico Horner into the leadoff spot. And maybe he does hit there. I mean, his skill set's all right there. but I think the Cubs like him lower in the order, like that 5, 6, 7 range, because he's also really adept at driving in runs. He's very, very good with runners in scoring position over his career. He makes a lot of contact. He moves the ball well. If there's a guy on second and nobody out, for example, like he really, really good and high success rate at getting the guy over, getting the guy in. That's the kind of guy you want in the middle of the order behind guys like Swanson, Happ, Suzuki, Bellinger. Like, so right now, I feel like those 4 guys are kind of hitting above Nico. So you have a pretty solid like 2 through 6 in some combination. I don't really know what they do leadoff spot, and I don't really know where Nick Madrigal fits in now either. And I think that's the big question mark is if the Cubs didn't sign Swanson, it was Nico Horner at shortstop. I think we all understood that. The other 3 shortstop had already signed. There was nobody else out there that was worth moving Nico off of shortstop, where he played very, very well last year. So it would have been a Nico and probably Nick Madrigal type of split. Madrigal first has to stay healthy, but secondly, now that Swanson's in the mix and Nico's playing second, I don't really know where Madrigal fits. I don't know where he plays. I don't know, if he's going to play a ton really. And if he does, like, does he DH? Right now, the Cubs don't have a DH option. Maybe they sign one. Maybe this becomes a moot point. But like Madrigal with 2 career homers, he's not the prototypical DH guy. That being said, like they did like him in the leadoff spot when he was going well, when he was healthy in August. And he's a guy that, can get on base at a 340 clip. So maybe he is a guy that leads off a little bit, or Christopher Morel or Zach McKinstry plays third or leads off a bit as well. So I feel like the Cubs kind of have to solidify that leadoff spot still in front of all those other guys. And maybe that is where a guy like Michael Conforto or somebody else out there in the free agency market could end up sliding in and fitting in as well. But yeah, definitely more to be desired, I think, on this offense, because while Swanson's a good fit and a good addition, Bellinger is still a question mark offensively. I think this lineup does leave something to be desired, because Swanson isn't the same level of bat as adding a Trey Turner, Carlos Correa, or Xander Bogaerts right in the middle of that. But again, adding him in the 2 spot or 3 spot, Cubs offense is way, way better than it was 24 hours ago.
Yeah, I think another thing that I thought was really impressive about Dansby Swanson is over the last 3 seasons, the 2020 shortened season included, he's missed 2 games, right? So the durability thing is there, right? You can pencil him in every single day of the lineup, and he will be fine. You can move him to the DH if you want to get him off his legs for a little bit. And Nico Horner's not that bad at shortstop. We've seen what he can do. It really gives a lot of versatility. And Nick Madrigal, I agree with you. It's a little bit of a wild card. And I think in a lot of ways it could be a good wild card for the Chicago Cubs, because when he's healthy, you've seen what he's been able to do. So if he can stay healthy, and let's not forget that a year ago at this time, we were having the same questions about Nico Horner, and look at how the conversations have turned. I'm not trying to say that, this time next year, Nick Madrigal's going to be playing Gold Glove level defense and is going to be one of the breakouts of the Chicago Cubs. But I'm trying to say that Nico Horner had the same kind of question marks, and the Cubs and Nico Horner worked out an offseason plan that kind of attacked some of the injury concerns that were happening, and he was able to overcome that. That you have to believe that Nick Madrigal and the Cubs are working towards some of those same fixes, so that he can be durable, so that he can play a full season. Because I think the bat has always been attractive to Jed Hoyer and the Chicago Cubs, because they like the contact, like you mentioned. You're going to get a ball in play every single time he's up there. I don't think they're done by any means with Nick Madrigal. I've seen a lot of things, from fans or on Twitter that it's time to move on. But I think there's something still very valuable in Nick Madrigal, especially like you mentioned, the DH, or on an off day coming in at second base, or whether it's a pinch hit at bat. There's something valuable of a guy that can just put the ball in play, especially if there's runners on base, being able to either advance them or get on base. He's still something that I think there's something still there in the lineup that he can provide to the lineup. And I think that's something that's very valuable. And like we mentioned, it also lengthens it. Zach McKinstry is a very solid player, but I think to count on him for 162 is going to be asking a lot. That now when you can pick your spots for him, I think that increases his value. Same thing with Christopher Morel. I think some of the issues with Christopher Morel late in the season when he struggled was he was just playing a lot every day, and he hadn't played, every single day in the major leagues ever. And now he's being asked to play every single day at center field, at shortstop, at second base, at third base. He's kind of moving all over the place. He's not getting in a rhythm. And I think having this ability to say, hey, you're going to play center field today, you're going to play shortstop, in a couple of days. let's ease off the pedal, let's ease off the gas pedal. I think that improves his value too. So I think just this signing alone just increases the value of everyone else on the Cubs roster.
Yeah, and honestly, it would be a great problem to have if Nick Madrigal continues
Yeah,
to, or actually like gets back to the form that he was prior to landing with the Cubs and hits well, and the Cubs would love that, right? They would
yeah,
love him, trying to fit that in and figure out if maybe one of them plays third, or again, if DH is the spot, or giving,
right.
like you said, a guy like Nico or Swanson half days off, and keep their bat in the lineup and DH them. There is something for sure that's like appealing about that, and the Cubs hope that happens. Same with
Yeah,
Christopher Morel, who for 2 months when he came up looked like, hey, this guy's a core piece for sure, and he still
yeah,
played pretty. I mean, he finished pretty strong as well. So like to have guys like that, and then Zach McKinstry, Miles Mastroboni, like left-handed bats, and those latter two who can play multiple positions and move around the field, it does give the Cubs a lot of options. I think they're a better team, obviously, by not having those guys play every day, being able to pick their spots, being able to play matchups, platoon, all of that stuff, which I think they have the potential to do now, obviously, by signing Dansby Swanson. But I think really the big takeaway from the Swanson move, at least in my mind, is the Cubs obviously feel like they have the prime opportunity right now to start getting back into the contention sphere, and they're looking to do that in 2023. And I don't think they're done. I didn't think they were done before this move. I think it's even more certain that they're not done. There is more to do, probably adding the bullpen, probably adding to this lineup. And when we're going to take a quick break here, but when we come back, we're going to hear from Lance Brozdowski and Bruce Levine talking about what more there is the Cubs could do and where they see potential fits right now on the open market.
Get your Wintrust exclusive debit card. Get your Cubs card.
Ooh, I'll take one. How much?
Actually, they pay you $300. You heard right. Get a $300 bonus when you open a Cubs checking account with Wintrust. Enjoy all perks and purchase with pride every time with your Wintrust Cubs debit card.
$300?
What?
I'll take a card.
$300? Get your exclusive card at wintrust.com/Cubs. Only $100 required to open. No monthly minimum balance and no monthly maintenance fees. Member FDIC and equal housing lender.
Tony, thanks a ton. We're happy to hop on the pod. I'm joined now by Bruce Levine. We're going to chit-chat a little about this new deal with Dansby Swanson, 7 years, $177 million. Bruce, they got their guy. When you first heard about this being reported, what was your reaction?
Well, my reaction was they got more athletic. They got better in the defense in the middle. I mean, what has Jed Hoyer and the front office done in this offseason? They have added projected home runs, probably 40 to 50 home runs. They've added stolen bases. They've added, most importantly, better defense. So you have up the middle defense at shortstop with Swanson at short. You're moving Horner over, who's a classic middle infielder at second or short. He's going to cover second base. Now that we don't have shifting anymore, this is essential to have good range from your second baseman over the past 4 or 5 years. Not that important because of shifting. You have a Gold Glove caliber center fielder in Bellinger. You have a Gold Glover in left in Happ. You have an outstanding right fielder and a Gold Glover from Japan in Suzuki. So what they've done is they've improved their defense. They've improved their speed. This is right up the alley of David Ross. You can feel that this is what Hoyer wanted in the front office, but you can also understand that David Ross has his seal of approval on this deal.
Yeah, and I think that defense point plays into the strategy we've seen the Cubs go to over the last couple of years, which is not a purely pitching to contact approach, but definitely trying to get pitchers to induce weak contact. We've seen that with a guy like Justin Steele. Kyle Hendricks historically, prior to injuries and such, has done the same thing. And I think that as a whole, as a team, right, when you're on the defensive side of the ball now, so to speak, you have great pitching that is able to limit contact. And when that contact's there, it's weak, which allows you then to have two great middle infielders. Bellinger's an MVP caliber player and center field Gold Glove caliber, as you mentioned. I think this is very much going to be a pitching and defense team. But you don't think the Cubs are done, right? You think there's more to come?
No, they need another couple bats in there. And I think that the one guy that I like out there is Michael Conforto. Now, he missed the entire season last year, but before that, he's a 25 to 30 and a 80 to 90 RBI guy, a left-handed bat, which is always coveted. And there's smaller ballparks in the National League Central. The ball's going to fly. So I think another bat like Conforto, who is probably, from what I understand, going to come to a team on a one-year deal with an option, probably a mutual option, just to rebuild his value. This would be a win-win for them. So I think that's part of the lineup's going to be a little bit more solid. We're still hearing, other names out there as well. So at this time, it's December the 17th, but I think the Cubs are far from being done right now.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's really interesting. I'd love to have a guy like Conforto in here on a one-year option, similar to maybe the deal that Bellinger signed, because it allows you to kind of bridge the gap between a lot of the minor league outfielders that we hope come to fruition. We're not exactly sure if they're going to come to fruition, right? We're talking about the guys like Brennan Davis, Canario coming off injury. There's a lot of guys out there that I think could play, but not necessarily play in 2023. And if you're trying to win now, which it's pretty clear by adding a guy like Swanson they are, I think if you add another guy like Conforto, you're able to DH him, mix him in there against righties with a guy like Mervis. That's a really, really good lineup.
Let's say all they do the rest of the way is sign Conforto and Mancini.
Yeah.
So then you have left-right that you can switch off at DH. You have left-right that you can switch off at first base, knowing that Mervis is going to be around. So those type of moves that aren't huge moves might be really important moves for the Cubs moving forward.
Absolutely, yeah. And I feel like we didn't even talk much Swanson, but that's the reality, right? You add a guy like Swanson, then the rest of the team starts to open up. You start to get kind of greedy, so to speak, thinking about what they could do.
Swanson, the beauty of Swanson is he's missed only 2 games in the last 3 years.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So, and he averages 60 extra base hits a year.
Yep.
He's an above average shortstop, above average range, and he comes from something we haven't talked about, a winning program, a winning organization, a team that's used to going to the playoffs. So you're bringing in a World Series champion in him as well. So with that in mind, I think it's a great deal. It's a lot of money, $25 million times 7 years, but I think they shaved down the years. I think from what I understand, it started at 9 or 10 years, came down to 7, and the price of poker for $25 million for a starting shortstop and a Gold Glover caliber shortstop. Probably a good deal for both sides.
Yeah, I think they did a pretty good job, especially comparing it to some of the other contracts where we've seen teams willing to go out to 11 plus years to flatten out that AAV, average annual value of a contract, to have less of an implication on the luxury tax bill. But again, Swanson at 7 years, $177 million. I think he's a great fit in this potential lineup too, maybe batting second, maybe even bats first, depending on what they want to do with a guy like Nico Warner. But Dansby Swanson, again, the new look Cubs are looking pretty great. Tony, we'll kick it back to you, man.
All right, thanks, Lance. That was good stuff there. So, Andy, we just heard Lance and Bruce break down a lot of options available in free agency for the Cubs, what more they need to do. So I'll turn it to you. What's the one main area of need right now for the Cubs? If you were put on your Jed Hoyer, Carter Hawkins hat, what would you do to address this team? What do you think is the top of the list right now after this Swanson signing?
I think you have to go to catcher, actually. I think catcher is probably the number one need that they need to solidify right now. Yan Gomes, we know his age. We know that it's not realistic to expect him to play even 150 games, let alone 162. And PJ Higgins was solid as a backup, but I think it's asking a lot for, a guy who played spent the majority of the season in the major leagues, but didn't play a lot. They had 3 catchers: Wilson Contreras, Yan Gomes, and PJ Higgins. I think you need to go find another veteran catcher that can work with this pitching staff, especially with a lot of young guys that can help them. There's a lot of interesting guys out there. Tucker Barnhart's an interesting name, that a very defensive first, something that they've made no secret is what they're looking for in a catcher. Someone like of that ilk that can improve them both from a game planning standpoint and also defensive standpoint, that continues to solidify that spine like we talked about earlier.
Yeah, for sure. I can't disagree with any of those points. I do think that catching is a huge priority for this team right now. If you're losing Wilson Contreras, and we saw them carry 3 catchers when Contreras was healthy for much of 2022 with Gomes and Higgins as well. So, yeah, definitely. And prospect Miguel Amaya coming up. He's dealt with so many injuries that it's hard to really pencil him in for much production or really playing time in the big leagues in 2023 at all. So I'm with it for sure. For me, though, I would say first base DH, I think, is the number one priority. I do think the Cubs need to add for bullpen help, add catching, like you said. But first base and DH, I think, is a big thing, because Alfonso Rivas has played good defense, but he hasn't really hit to the level that the Cubs would have liked in the big leagues. And beyond him, I mean, it's Patrick Wisdom, PJ Higgins, and that's about it right now on the roster. Obviously, Matt Mervis can figure into that, but he had a phenomenal 2022 season across 3 levels, even was great in the fall league. But I don't think the Cubs want to go into next season counting on him a lot. They want to give him time to adjust, maybe get more at bats in AAA where he only had a couple months. And I don't think they want to feel pressured or force or any of that And I think they might have to if they don't add more to that first base DH type spot. Because like we said, Madrigal's not a prototypical DH, and some of these other guys on the roster are better as versatile utility guys, depth pieces who can play multiple positions. So really adding one guy who could play first, who could play DH, who could do both, I think that's the top need for the Cubs. Because also I just think they need more offense. One injury to some of these big guys, and the offense starts to look a little bit more thin than you would certainly like from a contending team. So that's where it stands for me for sure. I think there are several guys who could fit. Trey Mancini, and who Bruce just mentioned, Michael Conforto could fit in DH outfield. There's a lot of guys out there that could still fit. And then, now that free agents are really coming off the board, I think all the top 20 guys are off. Maybe trades start becoming more of a factor, and maybe that's where the Cubs get into it too. So definitely a lot more offseason. One thing that stands out to me though is I just can't believe that we're not even to Christmas or the New Year's yet. And like I said, the top 20 free agents are all off the board. This is just moving so much faster. It's more like NFL and NBA, and I'm here for it. This is awesome. I love seeing baseball this active and this exciting in free agency.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is I think we both went into winter meetings expecting kind of a quiet winter meetings, especially given how it was in 2019, 2018, where there wasn't a lot of deals. Kind of felt like it was going to be a quiet winter meetings. That was very rushed, and now it seems like it's going really, really crazy. And as you mentioned, the trade season's only going to get crazier too, because there's going to be teams that want to get creative in how they acquire players, how they improve their teams. And I think the Cubs, with some of the prospect capital that they've acquired over the last few years, could definitely play in that market if they see a fit that makes them better and makes the franchise better overall in the long haul.
Yeah, I feel like it's every time I'm looking at my phone, there's just another big signing, like the Aaron Judge deal or the Bogarts or whatever. There's just so many different moves out there, like Andrew Benintendi obviously going to the South Side just a couple of days ago as well. So it's been a ton of fun. Obviously, it's really nice from our perspective just to see the Cubs be, doing something in this area. It's stuff for us to talk about, improving the roster, putting a better product on the field. I know Cubs fans are extremely happy with that. So it'll be really cool to see what more is in store for Jed Hoyer's front office, to see what this final roster comes. And obviously we'll evaluate it then, and we'll have all the news here on the Cubs Weekly Podcast. So that'll do it for this week's edition of the Cubs Weekly Podcast presented by Wintrust. Don't forget to download and subscribe and rate the pod on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast. And check us out in video form on the Marquee Sports Network app and YouTube. Thanks for tuning in, and Cubs fans, go have some fun this weekend and rejoice in the Dansby Swanson side.